Hello, welcome to the Talking City podcast coming from the Manchester Evening News. My name's Joe Bray, joined by Simon Bajkowski, who's at Manchester City. He's just been in Pep Guardiola's press conference. And Simon, you've got surely news of a number of signings given it's on transfer deadline day.
Yeah, let me just get this one up because I had not read it. Marlow Barrett, City have signed. That is news to a lot of people, I think. 15-year-old academy
it's news
talent.
to me, and I genuinely don't know if you're being serious or not.
No, apparently so. Apparently so. Yeah, very, very quiet deadline day. Pep was asked, if he was expecting a quiet one and said, yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the theme of City in the last few years, isn't it? They don't like to do business on deadline day because they like to have it all done and dusted, and it all is. There's a few things that may happen, but I think we're just waiting on Josh and Darla to leave. Maybe Wilson Esbrand on loan, but yeah, all of City's business is done as far as the first team goes, and they will carry this squad through at least till January, and that is largely what Pep was talking about today as to why they've decided not to make more signings and things like that.
So go on, let us know what Guardiola said, because he was sort of talking about the reasons for not necessarily replacing Julian Alvarez. And did he say maybe it's a mistake, but they're willing to go on with it?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to Pep largely, in that Pep doesn't like to work with big squads, and they could sign cover for Julian Alvarez, and maybe he would have wanted cover for Alvarez. They've certainly looked at a few strikers that they could sign, but it's getting the right one for the right price. I think he mentioned a few weeks ago, didn't he, about you need someone to come and sort of say, Erling, someone who's going to be ready to cover for Erling Haaland, but no one wants to come as sort of second fiddle. So it's difficult to get that kind of player in. And also with Gundogan coming in, it kind of gives them a bit more flexibility. Today Pep's mentioned Foden and Bernardo and James McAtee and Oscar Bob when he comes back from injury has been able to play in sort of a 9 or a false 9 position, knowing that none of them are like Haaland. But Pep doesn't want to kind of leave people sat there not playing. He wants everyone with a chance of playing. He thinks that team performances are better then. And so with the club not finding the right player necessarily for the right price and Pep not being fully convinced, they've said, you know what, it's easier to stick as is. And that's why they're going to do that. And if it is a mistake and if loads of injuries pile up, then they will go back into the market in January. And that's generally been how it's worked for the last few years. And generally they haven't needed to go in for anyone in January because it's been working pretty well.
And when they do sign someone in January, it's more of a longer term one, and that player might go back somewhere on loan. And it's rare that they then go into the first team as well, which I think underlines why this is a sort of a normal deadline day. I think last year there was Palmer left and Nunes came in, and that was sort of an anomaly, really, wasn't it? With some actual business to report on, but it's not really a surprise that they've stuck with what they're doing. And if the false 9 is the plan B, they went a whole season without any striker and still won the league. So to go a season with Erling Haaland as your striker and a plan B being your false 9s with the majority of those players still at the club, you can understand why they've not sort of put their hands in the pockets and gone and done that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we can say it now because it's the end of the window, but they've been very relaxed about signing cover for Rodri all summer. And the feeling has been like, well, yeah, we've got loads of options. We don't necessarily need to go out and buy. And that has been at odds with like what a lot of fans have been saying for the summer or large parts of the summer, that, surely this is a position that you need to cover with a new body coming in. And they've kind of been very, that hasn't really been the view from inside the Etihad, or certainly the view presented. Now, Gundogan coming in kind of a transfer that was not expected in any way is kind of like the dream scenario, because Gundo can cover that for, whenever he needs to, and they can say, yeah, we brought Gundogan in so he can cover, but they don't need to kind of hang their hat, I suppose, on we don't think we need a Rodri replacement because they've got Gundogan, but they've not really felt like they've needed the replacement. So there is, a lot of faith being put into this model of a small squad, and the performance seems to stop a lot of injuries, and yeah, like most of the time it ends up with City winning the league. So who's going to argue against it?
I think Kovacic has probably already justified or shown that he can justify that stance, because he's looked sort of just fine. You've not noticed him in defensive midfield, and there will be trickier tests to come. But I'm impressed with how he started, and then we've not been saying, "Oh my goodness, they really, really need a Rodri replacement," because Kovacic has just been doing the job, and obviously helped by players like Bernardo and Akanji, and it's a team effort. I think there's not just one player, but that also underlines why they've not been able to replace Rodri. Similar to the Alvarez issue, is that who's going to play second fiddle to someone who's going to start every single game in all the big games, and that's why Calvin Phillips hasn't made it. He's not adapted to that, and there's other reasons as well. But it's a very hard position to recruit, so you can understand the thinking. But I also think there's another part of it where Guardiola and all his players are saying there's too many games, we need bigger squads, we need all this, but then they've not actually acted on it. So what has sort of happened there? Because we know that Guardiola likes a smaller squad, but he's also complaining that there's too many games. So is it the plan's rotation? Is it, or is something not adding up there?
Yeah, I think it's rotation, and I think it's also, the conditioning and recovery that City do, that allows them to all stay fit, and but also not only that, the characteristics that they have when they sign players, that means they are robust enough to stay in the league and play a few games every week for 9 months. If Rodri doesn't play against West Ham, then he's had 2 months off since the Euro. So that is a really long time. As hellish as the 10 months either side of that may be, he has had at least that time to recover. And, I think if you look at the 2019-20 season, which is the only one in the last, 7, when City haven't won the league, Liverpool were phenomenal. City were massively derailed by Aymeric Laporte getting injured. They went in without a Vincent Kompany replacement, and then Laporte got injured, and City's defence was not stable enough to win the league. So, you could perfectly see a scenario this season where Erling Haaland breaks down and City don't have the ability to cover that absence, and not going in for an Alvarez replacement cost them. You could see something if Rodri gets injured, and they might not have, the cover. Probably a bit less so because Gundogan signed, but you can see these scenarios where they lose players and they're not able to replace them. But I think the kind of performance team has done so well that most of the injuries they suffer are just kind of, they're down to luck, bad luck, rather than anything else. So it's not like, dare you say, across the road at a certain football club where there are a hell of a lot of injuries that happen over the course of a season. Like, City are run very properly in every department, so that these things shouldn't happen, and if it does, it's bad luck. So I think, City are on the line of being okay, and they might get pushed beyond it and not be okay, but it's a line where they are comfortable, even if looking from outside people may be less comfortable with it. They are very comfortable there.
And that ties into Pep saying that it might be a mistake, but we're we're going with what we feel is right. On that theme, if you had to rate the window out of 10, I think it's a tricky one, because we're saying, yeah, they're happy with it, but also they would have loved to have, probably you would think, and they would love to have had a defensive midfielder and an attacker, or maybe another big signing. But they're on course for, I think, 125 million in profit before any add-ons and on sort of incomings and outgoings are accounted for. I think that's remarkable. I think it's over 500 or 600 million that in the last 3 or 4 years that they've raised in terms of selling, and it's been another really, really good strong summer in terms of selling players for a lot of money and also recouping money in terms of sell-on clauses. I I think Savinho's a good signing. I think Gundogan is, like you say, he popped up at a perfect time because he solves the problem of cover for Rodri and also an extra player at number 10 to sort of take the burden off those players. So I think I would say it's a middle of the road. So I'd say 6.5 out of 10 personally for sort of weighing it up. It's good, could have been better, but certainly not bad. And I don't think they're light in any area. I think they just would have liked to have a bit more, just a couple more options, I think, in a couple of the key areas.
Yeah, and it's also very hard to rate the window until next year because, I mean, I'm sure nobody will like hearing it, but there is an air of like the end of an era. And it's been great to keep De Bruyne this summer and great to keep Edison and great to keep Bernardo Silva and great to keep Kyle Walker. But like, what happens next summer when they're all a year older? And what happens next summer when Pep Guardiola is more likely than not to walk away? Like, do we witness not just, the best manager of all time leaving, but like half of one of the greatest teams of all time leaving? And then what a rebuilding job that is for the new manager to come in. Like, I think City, it feels like City have not spent that much this summer so that they can spend a lot in the next 2 summers. They spent a lot in 2016, 2017 when Pep first came in, and then after that it's kind of been evolution rather than revolution. But it feels like one last dance for this group of players. But come the end of this season, we might be talking about, well, Rico Lewis is integrated brilliantly. Savinho and Doku are the future of the team. Nico O'Reilly and James McAtee have joined Phil Foden and Oscar Bob in showing that, it with Guardiola as well, like it can be a really young and energetic team we could be looking at depending on who gets the minutes. So it kind of all depends on how the season plays out. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you can say that City have had a great window. But they have been consistent. I feel like City have got mostly what they wanted from the window. Like I say, they've not been majorly chasing players and not got them. It's been far more like a usual City window than, say, last summer was, when like they went for Rice, they went for Paqueta, they ended up with Nunes. That hasn't really worked out. So it's not that it's been a bad window. It's just that you wonder about what's going to happen in a year's time, whether they are sufficiently prepared for what's going to happen in a year, I think.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point in that it's been more controlled. They could have moved and spent lots of money for a player, but haven't. They've not got to the stage of walking away from Harry Maguire, for example. But if a deal hasn't been there, they've not gone for it and made any mistakes. I think last year was a bit more reactionary, maybe, but they got away with it. So yeah, I think I'd agree with you. But also the point of what could happen next year, I would have liked to see maybe sign someone in attacking midfield who can be a long-term De Bruyne replacement and give him a year to get used to the system, which we know does take time. But again, if Guardiola's not going to be here, why are you spending money on someone who the next manager might not like? It is a tricky one, and those questions do sort of maybe suggest why it's been a quieter one. So can I get a number out of 10 if I can then remind you of it next year when, as you say, it'll be far more obvious?
I think Gundogan takes it up to a 7.
Okay.
But yeah, not amazing, but not. Yeah, it's just it's really hard, isn't it? It's quite arbitrary anyway, but
Yeah.
it is.
We love ratings.
We love ratings, yeah. It's just one of those, isn't it? Because like you just can't bet against City. You can't look at them and say, well, you know, with the window they've had, they can be expecting 3rd or 4th place, because it's like they're going to challenge for the league, they're going to challenge for everything, probably going to win at least something. But at the same time, their window hasn't been spectacular.
I think probably the most important thing that City will look at is they're not any weaker, and they're still very, very good, and they've got the best player in the league, and some players who maybe didn't perform last year who can still come sort of improve, like Grealish, and even De Bruyne, who wasn't there for most of the season. So yeah, I feel like we've been a bit down, but actually it's not been a negative window at all. We'll move on. We learned the Champions League draw yesterday. Cristiano Ronaldo pushed a button and City discovered straight away, after all that build up, that they've got, let me read out: Inter Milan at home, PSG away, Bruges at home, Juventus away, Feyenoord at home, Sporting away, Sparta Prague at home, and Bratislava away. I know some fans will have been hoping some of those home ties might have been away. I think Prague and Bruges at home. If they were away, that would have been some sort of...
Yeah, and Milan.
Yeah, that would have been a really good set of aways. But I mean, I'm not much a fan of Paris anyway. But Juventus, Sporting, and Bratislava should be enough.
Yes, yeah. I mean, anywhere where there's cheap direct flights from Manchester is a win. So on that basis, maybe 2 out of 4 are wins, maybe 3 out of 4. Yeah, it's hard to think too much about the Champions League, because I mean, it's just a nonsense format, isn't it? Like, why are you playing 7 teams and like 8 teams and 4 home, 4 away, and there's no.
I
It
don't
doesn't
think you got
feel.
the memo, Si. I think we're meant to say how great it is that City are playing so many more different opposition, and
Yeah, it doesn't feel fair, does it? The whole point of a league table is that you play everyone at least once, probably twice, home and away, to account for home advantage. And then at the end, you decide who's best. Just like 8 random games. It's just mad. And even when like I was looking at it, and it's like Arsenal have got the exact same pot 1 opponents as City have, I think. I think Arsenal have got PSG and Inter. And then like Arsenal have got the same pot 4 opponents as Liverpool. And it just seems to be like, how can a draw that's seemingly so random just basically have like the same fixtures for clubs? I've definitely not got the memo, and maybe I'll get into it, and maybe it'll be really exciting in game weeks 5, 6, 7, and 8, as people scramble to qualify. But it just feels a bit naff.
Yeah, I'm not fully convinced. I can't remember which team it is, but one team has got the 2 German sides from pot 1, or they've got Dortmund and Leipzig.
Yeah.
Which feels like they're both quite good teams, but also have if you're playing 2 German sides, that's different to playing, I don't know, a French side and a Portuguese side. It is random in one sense, but also, yeah, I know everyone's saying it's going to be great, and it's, you know, there's going to be more competitive games, and yeah, Liverpool Real Madrid's a great game, and Barcelona Bayern Munich, and you know, City and PSG have had some fantastic games in the years. Don't need to talk about Inter Milan and what happened there. There are going to be some good stories, but I think you generally get enough of them anyway in the old group stage.
Yeah. And the country thing annoyed me as well, because it's like, fine if teams from each country can't draw each other, but then like to have a limit of how many teams from a country you can go up against. Like, so as soon as whoever it was got Bayern and Dortmund, it was like, you can't get any more German teams. Like, no, but look at the draw. Draw them against all 7 German teams and see how they get on. They're just like exclusively based in Germany for 4 months. Yeah, it's hard to get past the idea that it's just for money and exposure, and like everyone is aware of it and everyone is doing it because of this. And it's hard to think that they've said, here is a here is what we want to introduce for sporting benefit. And like, I think it's going to be hard sort of psychologically for players and journalists that like it goes on till the end of Jan, the group stage. Like, I think previously, certainly if you were from City's point of view, you could like, you win your first 4 games and you can pretty much box off the Champions League between November and February, whereas it never stops, does it? It's like the old Mitchell and Webb sketch. It's just like all the time now. The Champions League is going to be like never off our screens. And yeah, wonder whether it's maybe a bit too much.
And we don't know at the time of recording who City are playing when, but
But
it's
even that, like,
yeah,
I'm sure I read it would take like 1,296 balls for the draw to be done live. And it's like, why? How is it?
surely
How is
that
it
should be
so?
it's a bit too much this.
Yeah, let's scrap it and let's do something a bit nicer. Yeah, so the fixtures are only being announced on Saturday, except nobody knows when on Saturday.
No.
So everyone will be queuing in the queue for Oasis tickets and in the queue for Bratislava away before it rockets up on Ryanair, I think.
Oh yeah, that's the next thing, isn't it? On forget the format. The opposition should be relatively straightforward for City. They've got probably the easier draw that they could have had in pot one. Juventus away will be tricky, but again, there were more difficult teams in pot two. I'm looking at these teams, and you would expect them to win the majority, and City could sort of make a mockery of the whole thing and be almost qualified before Christmas anyway, depending on how the fixtures lie.
Yeah, they could. I think Inter will be the hardest team they've got. And they've got them at home, which helps. PSG are really interesting because PSG, every year is going to be PSG's year, isn't it? And their fixture list is absolutely horrendous. They've got such a hard. All 8 teams seem to be like games which they could lose. So I think it's going to be a really interesting season to see what PSG are like. But also, like you say, like if City play PSG last away from home and City are through and PSG are out, it kind of takes away any jeopardy from that game. So timing is going to be important. But City have got a very reasonable list, and they should be looking to qualify in the top 8 spots.
And there's a few, I think 3 or 4 of the game weeks in the Champions League fall either in between quite a difficult run in the Premier League or either before the Manchester Derby. I think is one. I think there's one between Arsenal and Chelsea, one between Tottenham and Liverpool, one is between successive away trips to Brighton and Bournemouth. So you don't want to be travelling to Bratislava or even to PSG in that week. So I think that will, as ever, will play a part. But yeah, it was interesting to see all the sort of forced positivity. I thought, and I'm glad that you've come straight out the blocks in criticising because yeah, I'm not convinced yet, and I think it'll take a few weeks to get convinced.
I think it'll take a few years really to like get used to the league table and
Yeah,
like whether what a reasonable looking draw looks like and everything like that. I just think it's strange. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the Champions League groups are boring, yeah, because there's not a lot of sort of movement in them. But I don't necessarily think that like I, you know, I don't want to pick a team and be unfair, but like Copenhagen have scored this goal, and that means that they've parachuted into the 9 to 16 places at the extent of Sporting and Club Bruges. Is that interesting to the people that UEFA want this competition to be interested by? I don't know. Yeah, maybe the excitement will flow through as soon as they start with Feyenoord or something. But it's yeah, it's not not there at the minute for me.
I'm sure when you're in Lisbon or Bratislava with a drink on the night before the game, I'm sure you'll change your mind.
Bratislava with 1,000 stag doos, yeah, we'll be bang up for it.
And 1,000 or so City fans adding to that as well. We're off to West Ham tomorrow. You mentioned Oasis tickets, and we're probably having to set off at a similar time as they're going on. So, yeah, if I'm late, that's why I'm in a queue with a million other people. Phil Foden still ill. Looks set that he's probably not going to be risked. Mateo Kovacic is back after his knock. Rodri is back in training. Not doesn't sound like to the extent that he's going to start, but it seems like it'll be the same group that played Ipswich. Can I get any advances on an unchanged lineup?
I think unchanged lineup would be sensible. Yeah. It's always a concern, isn't it, when Guardiola says a player is much better. Asked if they're available, and he says, "Oh, they're much better." It's like, yeah, that doesn't necessarily answer the question. So for that reason, then Kovacic might be out and Gundogan might be in. That might be a change. But it was kind of very minor with Kovacic, so he doesn't seem to have suffered too much. Yeah, I would be. Yeah, the only other one I'm wary of is Grealish, because Guardiola's kind of very, very wary about West Ham on the counter, and West Ham with their blistering pace and very good attack. And they've actually got a very good squad. Like they've had a very good transfer window, it seems, this summer. And so maybe Grealish comes in as someone who can keep the ball and limit West Ham being given the opportunity to attack. But as we talk about City's window, they're top of the table with 2 very good wins under their belt and playing very good football, and Erling Haaland looks pretty unstoppable. So I think you would just say to most, if not all, of the lads, just go out and do the same again.
I'm thinking back to the last 2 visits where Haaland gets off the mark with sort of a lot of direct play, and then it was Doku last season who was very, very good. And I'm wondering if he's tempted by Doku and Savino to do the same as they've done in the first 2 games and use the bigger pitch. But again, I also remember Grealish having a good game opposite Doku, I think, or was it in the game that Haaland scored? So yeah, I can see arguments for both, but I'd be tempted to. I'd like to see Doku and Savino just because they're on both sides. I think they are very dangerous as well. Before we go, there was an interesting comment from Guardiola last week. He said he had a chat with Erling Haaland in the summer about improving his game, and when he was asked a bit more about what they spoke about, he said he wants him to press more. He wants him to be more like an animal. He wants him to run at defenders and get involved more in the build-up. For the last 2 years, he's gone to quite extreme lengths to say he doesn't need to get involved. He's there to score. Haaland even asked himself the other day, does it matter if I'm involved more than putting the ball in the back of the net? But it seems like there have been conversations under the radar, and Guardiola's now said in public, I want him more involved in the build-up. So it feels like a bit of a change in approach of getting a bit more out of Haaland.
Yeah. It's kind of like they're sort of like, it's almost like 2 chess grandmasters with like completely different theories, isn't it? Like you got Haaland, the fella who says, if I take 5 touches and score 5 goals, that's great. And you've got Pep saying, well, no, the more touches you have, the more goals you're involved in, whether it's you or others. So take more touches and score more goals. And Haaland put it very nicely as the $1 million question. Probably, maybe 400 million question or whatever Haaland's worth these days. But it is interesting. It feels like Haaland's build-up is always going to be of topic, of issue. And he himself admits like he's nowhere near as good as the rest of his teammates, but he's far better than the rest of his teammates at sticking the ball in the net. I feel like, I think he said it. Did he say it after Chelsea when like he barely had any touches? And in big games, it was after Arsenal at home, wasn't it, last season when Roy Keane brought out the League Two comment. In bigger games, City probably don't look to get Haaland as involved as much, or he's not involved as much. But there are plenty of games where he can be more involved. I don't know. I mean, you were obviously on the tour. It feels like Pep has had a chat with Haaland more generally about sort of just like lifting himself. He's praised him a lot in the last few weeks, but it feels like as much as it's sort of get involved in the build up, it's just kind of like just be there and be involved and be sort of, giving 100% all the time and don't worry about injuries.
Well, what's he on now? Is it 94 in 101 appearances? It's like, how do you improve that player? If
Yeah,
he continues that scoring record, it's better than anything they've had before and will have for a long time. So it is the only way that you can improve him. And I just found it
yeah,
interesting that Guardiola didn't have to say that, and he sort of dropped the carrot by saying they had a chat. And then even when in the past Guardiola's asked to expand on something, he doesn't if he doesn't want to. But he was quite clear in saying, I need him to be more involved. And he said if you're more involved defensively, that improves you offensively as well. So
yeah,
it is a conversation that's clearly going on. And if it felt like he's might start to stop protecting him in that conversation because he wants a bit more, but Haaland's record speaks for itself, and he can do that. And it also felt telling that he did it after Haaland just scored a hat trick.
yeah. And I think that's you talk about the Haaland's record and whatever and Guardiola's record, and however kind of diametrically opposed the two different ideas seem. You're talking about two guys who will do anything to win and are constantly looking to improve even when they win. And so Pep might think, oh, Haaland needs to do more. And then he sees, it was the Leipzig game, wasn't it, when Haaland scored like 5 in 50 minutes and Pep's just got his head in his hands thinking the ball always goes to this guy. And then you've got Haaland who, is fairly confident in what he can do and knows what he needs to be doing, but then listens to Pep a bit and maybe does a bit more and maybe it works out and he thinks, well, maybe there is a bit more to that I can add. Aguero didn't think he could add to his game, and then Guardiola took him to another level, and Haaland is well aware of these things. So it's exciting really as a neutral to see kind of two people who are so very good at what they do not necessarily clashing with each other, but like constantly working to find out what the best solution is. And, if Pep's nudging Haaland publicly to say, you need to do more of this, maybe Haaland responds by being more involved, or maybe he responds by scoring 10 goals with 10 touches and says, no, I'll just do this, thanks. And Pep says, thanks very much. So it's a treat for anyone to watch.
Yeah, and I think if those comments were made to any other player, it could be like, oh my goodness, there's a big rift. I don't think Haaland will take that negatively at all. As you say, it's a relationship that those two styles don't necessarily match, but almost 100 goals suggests that it's working all right regardless.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
it's an interesting one to watch. And like I say, Haaland started very, very well this season, and he looks like the summer off and having a pre-season has definitely helped, because he got, I think, 5 in pre-season as well. Can I get a score prediction for West Ham?
I will say 3-1 Manchester City.
I was going to say 2-1, so we're on a similar wavelength there. I
Yeah,
think it will be another win, but maybe one of the tougher games they've had so far. We'll be there at the London Stadium tomorrow with the live blog, the ratings, the report, all the analysis from West Ham. You can follow us there on the Manchester Evening News and on the usual places on Twitter, Facebook and WhatsApp. If you could like and subscribe this very podcast where you are currently watching or listening to it, we are available on wherever you get your podcasts. A comment would be well appreciated as well. And we'll be back next week for the start of the international break. Already an international break to assess where City stand and how they've done after 3 games of the Premier League season. Thanks for joining us.